What's going on, everybody? I'm Will Button. This is DevOps for Developers, and we are jumping right into this video, James Bond style, right into the action. Let's imagine that I am a new developer working for the team here, and I'm going to start working on this repo here, this React dashboard. The first thing I'm going to do is check out the code, and then I'm going to run the command Pulumi up. It's going to ask me to confirm that I want to run the updates. I'm going to tell it, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. And it's going to create a bunch of stuff for me. It's creating a Node.js application that runs in a Docker container. It's creating a Docker network so that all my resources are isolated from a networking perspective. And it's up and running. So if we jump over here and we go to localhost 3000, and just like that, the application is up and running on localhost. So as a new developer, the only thing I had to do was check out the repo, and I needed Pulumi and Docker installed, right? Pretty cool. So let's do this. I'm going to jump in here to the login page, and I'm going to change this text. And as soon as that saves, I've got hot reloading. So I just save the text there, and the files in my Docker container automatically reload, right? So I'm happy with this change. So let's come over here and let's create a new branch, and we'll call this login page update. Spelled it correctly. We'll create that, come over to my commit tab here, and going to check in that or commit that file, push that up to the repo. So now when I go back over here to GitHub, it sees that new code has been pushed up. So we'll compare and create a pull request. I want to merge this into my repo, not the place I forked it from. Say update login text, create the pull request, and I can merge that. Since I'm reviewing my own code here, I've got to confirm that I merged it. And now check this out. Over here in our GitHub Actions, that's going to go ahead and merge that in. That's going to take it a couple minutes. So through the magic of video editing, we can jump right to the end, and you can see that the GitHub action completed in 3 minutes, 21 seconds. Not bad. But if we go over to our website here, prod.devopsfordevelopers.io, here is our deployed website with the changes that I made into the code. And so that's all it took for a new developer to get onboarded to our application, to make a code change and get their code change into production. And I think you got to admit that was pretty easy, right? So now that you see what we're building here, let me show you exactly how to build it. If we take a look at the folders in our application here, there's a couple key folders here. There's our .github folder that has our GitHub Actions. The app folder contains the application code, the React website that we're building here. And then in the application root, we've got this index file, a couple of Pulumi YAML files that tell it everything how to work and how to get deployed, right? The key thing I want to focus on first here is in this index file. Let me crank this font up so you can see what we got going on here. The first thing we're doing is creating a Pulumi stack, and that stack, basically you want to think of that as your deployed or running environment. So when I'm working on my workstation here, I want to be using the dev stack. Whenever I deploy to production, I want that to be prod, and that's what get stack will give you. Now, the next thing I do in here is I check to see which stack I'm working on, and that just makes sure that whenever I'm running locally here that I'm only building my dev stack. I'm not trying to actually build the Pulumi resources for production. So if my stack is equal to dev, then we're going to create a new Docker image, and that Docker image is going to use the context of our app folder containing our application code. It's going to name that image for us. It's going to create a new Docker network so that our Docker resources here are on physically or virtually separated networks from any other Docker instances I might have running. And then it's going to create a Docker container using that image name. It's going to expose the ports for my React app, put me in the network that it created, And then here's where we get the hot reloading part. It's going to mount that app directory into the container so that as I make changes to the application code, then it automatically picks those up inside the Docker container and reloads my app for me. Now, if it's not the local dev stack, then it's going to be working on the prod stack, and we're actually going to come back to that because as you saw, I made changes to my code and then I opened up a pull request, and when I merged that in, that kicked off the build process and deploy process using GitHub Actions. So let's take a look at the GitHub Actions configuration here. So I have my workflow named push or Pulumi, and on a push to the main branch, it's going to run my update job. And then there's some different steps here. It checks out the code. It sets up Node.js with Node version 16. And then we configure the AWS access region and secret key. So here's something about that. That is not my AWS credentials. In my AWS account, there are a set of credentials that belong to a user named Pulumi, all right? And that's the credentials that we put in here. And I'll show you that in just a minute because they get stored over in GitHub so that we can pull that out during the GitHub Actions process. And one of the key things about those credentials is you're going to see in this section, we're building an S3 bucket and doing some Route 53 stuff. So if you go into my AWS account and you look at that Pulumi user, that's the only thing it has access to. And as I start using Pulumi more and I start deploying more resources, I will give additional permissions in AWS to that Pulumi user account. But we always want to operate on the principle of least privilege required. And so right now it only needs access to S3 and Route 53, and its permissions reflect that. We've got some Node.js work to take care of here, so we switch over to our working directory of app, and we run npm install to install our package dependencies, and then we run npm test to make sure that all of our tests pass for the application. The next thing we do is an npm run build, which takes our TypeScript files and converts them into JavaScript and static assets because we're running this as a single page app from an S3 bucket. Then we step back to our root folder, run npm install to install our Pulumi dependencies, which is how Pulumi is going to install and manage our application. And then right here, we tell that the Pulumi stack it's going to bring up is the stack named prod, which is our production resources. And now when it does that, we can come back over here to our index.ts file, and we can take a look at the production environment that we're going to build in AWS. So we create an AWS S3 bucket, and it's going to be named based off of the stack name for the domain that I want to run this in. I like to do that just so that it's really clear when you're looking at a bucket exactly what you're looking at. You could also use, www or app.devops for developers, whatever makes sense for you. I just like tying it to the stack name, personal preference. The next thing we're going to do is go to Route 53 and get the hosted zone for the domain that I already own, devopsfordevelopers.io. Not only do I own it, but it's also managed by Route 53. Key step there. And then we're going to create this new A record in Route 53. And that's where we create the DNS name for this. So it's going to be prod.devopsfordevelopers.io. If we had a separate staging environment, we would do the same thing here, and it would be called staging.devopsfordevelopers.io. But that Route 53 record gets created automatically without the developer having to understand what that means or what it's actually doing. Then we grab all of our assets created from our npm run build process, and we do this little upload to S3 thing here. That's a function that I created right up here. And all we're doing is just iterating through our build folder. I can actually take a look at that right here. So in our build folder, we've got our asset manifest, our fav icon, the index file, and then in the static folder, our CSS, JavaScript, and media files. So it's going to iterate through all of those, and had to do a little kind of funky thing here because S3 files in S3 don't really have directories, right? But we need to mimic that structure. So we're just doing check here to see if that is a directory. If it is, we're doing a recursive call back to this function so that we only upload the files into S3, and we don't try to upload folders because you can't actually do that in S3. Once we're done, we have a bucket policy defined that we're going to apply to that bucket, and we'll take a look at that here. We specifically want to state that our bucket allows public access. You don't want to do that on your S3 buckets unless you're actually hosting a public website there. So we'll take care of that right here. And again, here's like one of the reasons why this is so cool and I'm so excited about it is the bucket policy is right here in the code with the website that it's responsible for deploying. So you don't have to remember to go look someplace else for it. It's just right here. And if you need to change it, you change it just like you would any other piece of code for your application. And then the last thing we do is we just export the website URL and the DNS name for the website, which really aren't important because we use this handy dandy feature right here where we know what the domain name is going to be. That's just kind of a nice to have feature. So now one of the things that ties all of this together so that Pulumi knows how to deploy and manage our AWS infrastructure has to do with the Pulumi service itself. So I'm logged into my Pulumi dashboard here. And if we look at our React-Berry dashboard app, there's the dev instance here, which are my local Docker files. And then in production, we have the production assets that we created that Pulumi's managing and tracking for us. And it does this because that provides state management for us. And if you've ever used anything like Terraform, you probably have a pretty good idea of how important it is to track state and how it's kind of hard to do, or it can be hard to do until you screw it up enough times to figure out what the right way to do it is. So Pulumi kind of takes all of that on its shoulders for you using their app service. So anyone else who logs into this application, any of the developers on the team, whenever they go to deploy, it's going to check with the Pulumi service, get the current state, and then use that to figure out what needs to be changed for this next deploy that it's going to do. In our application here, our prod service has 49 resources that are being managed here. If we click over on the resource tab, you can see that each one of them are, or majority of them are the individual files from our application. And I did that just to show you what's actually possible in Pulumi. I probably wouldn't do that outside of doing this demo for you to see. And where that's happening is in our upload to S3 function here. You can see for every file, we're creating a new AWS S3 bucket object for each file in our directory, and then having Pulumi track and update that. Now, that's overkill for an application like this, right? Because every deploy we do, there's going to be new static assets created. So these really don't have a lifespan beyond a single deploy anyway. And so this is overkill to do it, but I wanted you to see how it kind of worked. And the reason why I say it's overkill is because in the Pulumi billing section, you get billed based on the number of resources that Pulumi's tracking for you. So it makes absolutely no sense for us to be tracking static/JS 13.128, whatever the rest of that file name is. It doesn't make sense, and we're going to be billed for Pulumi managing that as well. And I'll come back at the later part of the video here and we'll talk more about the billing thing. But if billing, or if either the billing situation or the fact that you aren't in a position for some third party to be managing state for your application, Pulumi is open source, so you can just download Pulumi and run it and handle the state management yourself without using the Pulumi service here. So here's why I think this is so cool and why I'm so excited about Pulumi. You saw in the beginning of the video exactly what I had to do to deploy to production. So from a developer's perspective, I didn't need to know that we were even working with AWS. I didn't have to know that we needed an S3 bucket configured as a website bucket. I didn't know that I needed to create a Route 53 A record in DNS. All of that stuff just happened for me. And so at no point, not only did I not have to know how it was deployed, although if I was curious, the code is right there in the repo where I'm working so I can look at it. I didn't have to log into AWS or log into a separate tool like Ansible or Terraform or Chef or Puppet or any of those. It's all just right here where I'm writing my code. And I didn't even have to contact someone from DevOps to set all of this up. And so that's what makes this so cool for me, is it allows those of us who work in DevOps to create this environment where development teams can just do the thing that they do and operate in the way that we want them to operate without us being the bottleneck, right? And to me, that's the ultimate goal of DevOps, is we just give them all of the power that they need without giving them any of the risks or adding to their workload of what they're already doing. And so as excited as I am about Pulumi, there's a couple of things that I've not been thrilled with. And so I just kind of feel like I have to tell you about them here because this video is not sponsored by Pulumi. Well, even if it was, I still got to be honest with you, right? Regardless. Okay, so billing. I can tell you, man, the people over at the IRS are looking at how Pulumi handles billing, going, dude, why did we not think of that? Because you got to wrap your head around this. You know, I showed you a few minutes ago that we were managing 49 resources, and in Pulumi's billing system, you get a certain amount of resources you can manage within their free tier, and then beyond that, it's like 0.0007 cents per resource per hour or something like that. So it's very, very confusing to know what your bill, or if it forecasts what your bill is going to be when you first get started with this. And I'm going to be using Pulumi a lot more, so I'll be doing a video probably a couple of months from now, letting you know how the billing is going and trying to give you some tools so that you can forecast what the billing is going to look like for a given scenario. But billing is kind of awkward, so that was a bit of a bummer. The other thing is, it feels like I'm managing, well, it doesn't feel like, because I am. I'm managing two apps in one repo. There's the Pulumi code that manages my infrastructure deployment, and then there's the application code that's the actual thing I'm trying to build and deploy. And those are two separate things in the same repo. But in the end, I kind of think that it's worth it because, like I mentioned earlier, the Pulumi stuff is written in the same language that the application code's in. So in this example, it was all TypeScript. So any developer working on this team already knows TypeScript because that's what they were hired for. And so they can rationalize what the infrastructure looks like because it's written in a language they understand, which can't be said for some of the other tools in this space. The other thing that I didn't like, and I'm actually going to change it to make it less of a problem. You saw that my Pulumi code was in the application root of my directory, and then my application code was in a subfolder called app. That felt really cumbersome and backwards to me because really that infrastructure code is going to get written once and it'll rarely be touched throughout the life of this application. But the application code is going to be changing every day. And so it feels clumsy to have to stumble over the Pulumi code to get to my application code in the hierarchy of my folder structure. So in the future applications that I'm going to use with this, I'm actually going to flip that around. I'm going to keep my application code in the root directory, and then I will put my Pulumi infrastructure code in a folder probably called infra or something like that, so that it's still there, it's still in the repo, and it's still very accessible to everyone on the team, but you're not continuously scrolling past it whenever you're trying to just make some application code changes. So that's it. That's like the intro to Pulumi, and I'm super excited about it. I'm looking forward to using it a lot more, and I will keep you updated with videos on what I do with it and how we're progressing with it over here. And if you actually want to see the code, see the code that I use to deploy this, head on over to devopsfordevelopers.io/Pulumi, and I will hit you up with a link so that you can check out this repo, take a look at the code, because sometimes that's helpful just to see like a working example of it, especially when you compare it with the video where you actually just watched me do the whole thing. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.